I think I figured out my logging in issues, so hopefully everyone we're recording and hopefully everyone can see the source sheet. I'm zooming in. All right. So we are in Parshat Vayeshev. Um, call this part. I don't know what part, but the next chapter in Yaakov's life, as he has successfully. Hey, Avi.
Hey,
Yaakov has successfully returned home back to Eretz Canaan, has reunited with his father Yitzchak, who passed away at the end of last week's parsha. Um, and now, right, the parsha opens. This parsha, Vayeshev Yaakov be'eretz Migrei Aviv be'eretz Canaan. Yaakov settles in the land where his father had sojourned, the land of Canaan. Rashi tells us on this that Vayeshev Yaakov. I don't have it in front of me, but Yaakov wanted to lashevet. He wanted to just sit and enjoy his retirement days, and that was not meant to be because he is confronted immediately with the tension between his sons, between what we call the brothers and Yosef. Um, so there's never a moment of rest for Yaakov, um, and the parsha really begins what we normally call the Yosef chapters, the Yosef stories. There's a very important interruption to that, which is the story of Yehuda and Tamar. We're not going to deal with that tonight, but that's certainly a story in an episode worth exploring. And so by the end of the parsha, Yosef has been sold into slavery. He is in Egypt. He, comes to some prominence in the house of Potiphar. Then Potiphar's wife tries to seduce him, tries to do whatever she wants to do with him. Yosef resists, and as a result, winds up in jail in Egypt. At the end of the parsha, he encounters the butler and the baker and successfully interprets their dreams. Um, that's sort of the bullet points of what transpires in this week's parsha. The other
Could you
interesting
make it
thing,
larger, please, Rabbi?
yeah, of course, I could always make it larger. Is that better or more?
A little more.
Okay. All right.
Good.
The answer is until it doesn't, I have to readjust the screen. That's when it's big enough. Okay. So the other interesting thing which we've talked about in years past, and maybe we'll touch on slightly tonight, is that not necessarily Parshat Vayeshev, but the Parshiot of Yosef are always coincide to some extent with Hanukkah. So we always will read at least one of the Yosef Parshiot, if not two, over the course of Hanukkah. And let me just use this as a public service announcement reminder for myself that we'll be on vacation the next 2 Tuesdays. So we're going to take
where
a
are we
little.
going?
Where are we going? We're going to Florida.
Ah,
Yeah. So
Wonderful.
yeah. So we're going to take a little break from the Parsha Shir, and we'll resume in I guess in 3 weeks, in 3 Tuesdays from now. Um, so okay, I got that out of the way. So a few elements I wanted to touch on with Yosef, and this is stems I think I've referenced in the past. I've recently started listening to this wonderful Shir podcast on the Parsha from Matan, hosted by Yosefa Rubel Fogel, I think is her name. And every week she interviews someone different. And I'm finding their conversations to be fascinating and offering some really interesting perspectives on things. So this is heavily based in their episode from this week where she interviewed and the teaching was done by Dr. Tanya White, who's someone I had never heard of before. She teaches at Matan also. Um, I think they also said she teaches at Bar Ilan. I'm sure at some other places of Torah learning in Israel. So anyway, so some really interesting observations that are made. Let's start with the very beginning of the Parsha. So we already mentioned the first pasuk, the first verse that tells us that Yaakov is now back settled in the land of Canaan, and he just wants to live out his old days in peace, and he's not able to do that. Why not? Eila toldot Yaakov. These are the generations of Yaakov. Yosef ben Shvas Reishana, Hayaro et Echav Batzon. Who Na'ar et bnei Bilha et bnei Zilpa, Neshei Avi, Vayave Yosef et Ibatam, Ra'al el Avihem. This then is the line of Jacob. At 17 years of age, Joseph tended the flocks with his brothers as a helper to the sons of his father's wives, Bilhah and Zilpah, and Yosef brought bad reports of them to their father. Okay, so some point out that the Torah emphasizes that Yosef kind of hangs out with the children of Bilhah and Zilpah, of the two Pilag Shot, the two concubines, and not the children of Leah, because the children of Bilhah and Zilpah were also seen as, at a lesser standing, at a lesser status, and so they were all the outcasts hanging out together, and it was the children of Leah who really dominated the social hierarchy within the family. Okay, so anyway, Yosef, as a lad, as a youth, is hanging out with the children of Bilhah and Zilpah, and he's unclear exactly what, but he's bringing bad reports about his brothers back to his father. And then, of course, the fateful observation the Torah makes: "V'Yisrael ahav et Yosef mikol echa banav ki ben bezikunim hulo ve'asalo ketonet pasim." Yisrael, it's identified as Yisrael, not Yaakov, but the father Yisrael loves Joseph from all the brothers because he was a child of his old age. He made for him the ketonet pasim, the coat of many colors. Many point out it doesn't quite make sense, because if the driving reason to love Yosef is that he's the child of his old age, so he had a son born after Yosef, Binyamin. So Binyamin should have been the favored son if that's the only criteria. Clearly, that's not the only criteria. All sorts of explanations are offered as to why Yosef and not Binyamin. Presumably, I think the simplest is because Binyamin's birth led to the death of Rachel, and so there's an element of tragedy and an element of sadness associated with Binyamin that perhaps prevents Yaakov from seeing him as the favored son. So anyway, Yaakov makes Yosef this coat, and that, of course, seeds more jealousy among the brothers. Vayu echav ki oto ahav avihem mikol echav, vayisnu oto velo yachlu dabro l'shalom. The other brothers see that their father loves Joseph from all the others, and they hated him, and they could not speak nicely about him or with him. And then we have Yosef's dreams. Vayachalom Yosef chalom. Yosef has a dream, he shares it with the brothers, and they hate him even more after he tells them of his dream. What is the dream? Listen to this dream that I just had. We were gathering sheaves of wheat or corn in the field, and my bundle of wheat stood up above all the other ones, and all of your bundles bowed down to mine. They said, do you think you're going to rule over us? Right? Everyone understands the significance of this dream and the interpretation. And they hated him. They hated him even more for his dream, v'al divarav, and for his words. It's one thing for Yosef to have a dream. It's another thing for him to share his dream with the brothers. So they hate him on both accounts. Vayachalom od chalom acher, vayisaper oto le'achav. Yosef really doesn't seem to get the message. He has another dream, and he again shares it with his brothers. Do I need to scroll down? Not yet. Okay. And he Yomer hine chalamti chalom od He said, I had another dream, and in this dream, the moon and the sun and 11 stars are all bowing down to me. ויספר אל אביו ואל אחיו, ויגער בו אביו, ויאמר לו מה החלום הזה שחלמת, הבוא נבוא אני ואימך ואחיך להשתחוות לך ארצה. He tells his father and his brothers, and his father gets angry at him. He says, what's this dream that you're talking about? Are me and your mother and your brothers going to come and bow down to you, right? So, right, the Gemara, I think, points out that every dream has an element of truth and an element of untruth. And the untruth in Yosef's dream is that his mother is dead, right? Rachel can't bow down to him. So that's the element of untruth, and that's what Yaakov is picking up on. But again, the theme is that everyone's going to bow down to Yosef. Vaykanubo echav v'aviv shamar et hadavar. His brothers are jealous of him, and his father guards the matter, or kept it in mind. Unclear exactly how to translate that. Okay, so I want to focus. There's two different things that I think, two themes I want to develop based on this. The first, let's pick up on what Rashi tells us in source number 2. V'hu na'ar. Yosef is a lad. He's a youth. Haya oseh ma'aseh na'arut. He was acting like a child, like a teenager. He was acting in a, we could say an age, like, say again?
Immature.
Yeah, immature. Well, or I was going to say age appropriate, but age appropriate is immature, right? So he's acting immaturely. What's he doing? Mitakein b'sa'aro, mishamesh be'einav, kedei she'eh nireh yafeh. He was overly concerned with his appearance. He would always dress his hair, touch up his eyes, so that he should be good looking. Okay, so put this together with the depiction of Yosef sort of naively and perhaps immaturely again, sharing the dreams that he has with the brothers, right? And okay, we could cut him some slack on the first dream, but once he sees the reaction that they have, why would he share the second dream with them? So Yosef is acting very immaturely here. And that's sort of the starting point where we first see with Yosef is that he's a teenager, he's immature, and he's very self-absorbed. He's focused on himself, right? The focus of his two dreams are all about him, right? He's at the center of it. Everyone's bowing down to him. That seems to be where Yosef is at the beginning of the story. And if that's the case, we can understand to some extent the brothers' animosity towards him. It's very easy to hate the egoist. It's very easy to hate someone who's so filled up with themselves, and not concerned with anyone else. That's where Yosef begins. If we scroll down to source number 15, and this was, I thought, a really interesting insight. So now we're located in the home of Potiphar. And Yosef has risen to prominence, right? Become, basically in charge of everything that his master has. And this was the first really interesting observation that I heard in the shiur from Dr. White. As Yosef grows in prominence, and Potiphar's wife, Eshet Potiphar, I always want to call her Mrs. Potiphar, becomes more and more obsessed with Yosef, and makes advances towards him. So the Torah tells us in Pasuk Chet in verse 8, Vayima'ein, Vayomer el Eshet Adonav, Hin Adoni lo yada iti ma babayit, v'chol asher yesh lo natan beyadi. He refuses, he resists, and he tells the wife of his master, I've been given total trust. My master doesn't even keep track. He doesn't keep eyes on me. He trusts me totally. Inenu gadol babayit hazeh mimeni v'lo chasach mimeni me'uma ki motach. There's no one greater than me with more power than me in this home. And he's not, the only thing that he's withheld from me is you, Basher Atishto, because you're his wife, right? That's the one thing that's off limits to me in the entire house. How could I do this horrible thing? And that would be a sin to God. She was, every day she advances, and every day he resists. On this day, right? Rashi tells us it was some big holiday in Egypt. Everyone was out celebrating. Only Yosef is left in the house. ויבוא הביתה לעשות מלאכתו, ואין איש מאנשי הבית שם בבית. He goes to do his work, and there's no one else in the home. ויתפסהו בבגדו, ותתפסהו בבגדו לאמור שכבה עמי. She grabs his clothing and she says, "Sleep with me." ויעזוב בגדו בידה, ויאנס ויצא החוצה. He leaves his clothing in her hands and he runs outside. ויהי אותה כי עזב בגדו בידה. And when she sees that he left his clothes in his hands, vayanas achutza, and he ran outside. Vatikra lanshe beita vatomer lahem leimor re'u hevi lanu ish ivri litzachek banu ba'ilai lishkav imi ve'ekra bekol gadol. She says, "Look what this Hebrew servant has done. He wanted to take advantage of me, act inappropriately, and I called out, I screamed out for help. Vahi kisham'o ki harimoti koli when he heard me screaming out, he left his clothes in my hand and he ran outside. Vatanach bigdo etzla adbo adonav el beito. She holds on to Yosef's clothing. Presumably he put on something else until Potiphar returns home. She tells her husband that Yosef tried to act inappropriately. When I screamed out in protest, he left his clothing in my hand and he ran outside. So Dr. White notes that in this episode, there's a common theme that we wouldn't or common phrase that repeats itself that we wouldn't necessarily expect to be of any significance. Anyone want to venture what that phrase is?
Well, I know from reading it's
okay. So
he went outside.
You could cheat. You could look ahead. But right. So 4 times we have the phrase "Vayanas vayetze hachutza." He goes outside. Again, that seems to be a detail that's not so essential to the story, right? All we need to know is that, somehow, whatever, that he advances, she advances, tries to seduce him, he resists, and then she tries to put on a charade that it was really Yosef who tried to tempt her or seduce her. So Dr. White says, why does the Torah, source number 18, sorry, let me scroll down and share this with everyone. Why does the Torah tell us so many times he went outside? I believe the Torah is telling us in a psychological sense that he went outside of himself. Something calls him to go outside of himself. So this child, this Yosef, who started out as totally self-absorbed, we see that even perhaps in the beginning of his interaction with Eshet Potiphar, when he says, "I'm the most powerful, most important person in this household," right? He still has that, but when he's really put to the test, he's able to, right? If he's interested in amassing power, so sleeping with the master's wife might be a good way to get even more power. But he resists, and he's able to step outside of himself. And that theme actually continues in the Yosef story. If we go now at the very end of the Parsha, when Yosef is in jail, so again, he's in jail and he rises to prominence in the jail. It seems that the head of the jail is the same Potiphar whom Yosef served in the house, and Potiphar continues to show favor to Yosef. Maybe Potiphar is on to his wife and realizes that she wasn't the most loyal spouse to him. But anyway, Yosef is given some sort of authority, some sort of importance in the jail cell as well. He's put in charge of these seemingly VIP prisoners, the Paro's butler and baker. And so in source number 3, chapter 40, Vayachalmu chalom shnehem, ish chalomo balayla echad, ish kepitron chalomo, hamashke va'ofe asher lemelech Mitzrayim asher asurim beveit hasohar. Each one of them had a dream, each dream according to its proper interpretation. The butler and the baker who served the king of Egypt, who were now put in jail. Vayavo alehem Yosef baboker, vayar otam vihinam zoafim. Yosef sees them in the morning, and he sees them and they are distraught. Zoafim. Vayish'al et tzvisei paro asher ito, v'mishmar beit adonav, le'mor madua penechem ra'im hayom, and he asks them, what's bothering you? Why are you so upset? So the point that she wants to make here is that Yosef, whatever role he has in jail, there's nothing to his benefit that's going to come from helping these guys out. And yet, he seems to have a sensitivity and an empathy to their distress, to their suffering, right? He recognizes that something is eating at them, that they're distraught, zoafim, and he asks, what's wrong? Is there anything I can do to help? So from the beginning of the Parsha, where we have this totally self-absorbed Na'ar, who's only concerned with his appearance and making his brothers feel bad, by the end of the story, we have someone who is very much attuned and empathetic to others around him. That's one of the great progressions that she notes in Yosef. And then she goes on and she says that this is actually something that's not unique to Yosef, but this is a distinct feature for Jewish leaders. Right? She mentions, I didn't bring the Medrash, I thought I was going to save paper, which I usually fail at doing, but she mentions like the Medrash with Abraham, right? Why did God choose Abraham? So one story, one explanation is that he sees the palace on fire. Okay, so I think we went deep into that 1 or 2 years ago. But one of the points, one of the messages of that story is that Abraham had a sensitivity to the world around him, right? He's aware of the world and he wants to try to, he sees a palace on fire and he wants to know who's the owner of this palace. Can we help him? Can we save him, right? He has this sense and sensitivity to the world around him. She says we see this also with Moshe. When Moshe is tending after he's run away to Midian and he's tending to the sheep of Yitro, Moshe hayaroet son Yitro, source number 4. Chotzno kohen Midian vayinhag et hatzon achar midbar vayavo el har Elokim choreva. Moshe is tending to the sheep of Yitro and he's shepherding them, and they come to Mount Chorev, the mountain of God in Chorev. Vayera malach Hashem elav bilabat ish mitoch hasneh. Vayar v'hine hasneh bo'er ba'esh v'hasneh unenu ukal. An angel of God appears to him in the form of a burning bush, and he sees that the bush is burning and it's not consumed. Vayomer Moshe asura na ve'ereh tamareh hagadol hazeh madua lo yivar hasneh. Moshe says, this is a very strange occurrence. Let me go investigate. Why is the bush not burning? Vayar Hashem ki sar lirot. God sees that Moshe was disturbed by this unusual occurrence, that Moshe went to check it out. Vayikra elav Elokim mitoch hasneh. And that's when God calls out to Moshe. When Moshe shows a sensitivity and an awareness of the world around him and the unusual occurrence, that's when God calls out to him. Right? We might see that this was actually the first test, right? Clearly, we understand that Moshe would be the one that God speaks to eventually. But maybe Moshe had to, just like Avram had to pass many tests, maybe this is a test that Moshe had to pass. And before God communicates with him, is Moshe has to display this curiosity. And then she connects it to a very beautiful idea that Abraham Joshua Heschel talks about many times, the idea of radical amazement. So Heschel says, as civilization advances, the sense of wonder declines. Such decline is an alarming symptom of our state of mind. Mankind will not perish from want of information, but only for want of appreciation. The beginning of our happiness lies in the understanding that life without wonder is not worth living. What we lack is not a will to believe, but a will to wonder. Okay, so we have to have this sense of amazement. And so she wants to say that this, we see in Yosef one of the first instances of this sense of amazement, this sense of curiosity, this sense of being able to look at the world around and have an awareness and attuneness to the world that leads to him growing to become Yosef Hatzadik that we recognize, which I thought was a really beautiful idea. I believe we spoke about this last year, but there is a connection here with Hanukkah as well, and that is it's a little bit afield from where we were, but I think it's I thought it was a beautiful idea. So we were told in the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, source number 6, that Yosef was freed from jail. He goes to interpret Paro's dream on Rosh Hashanah. We know that as part of his preparation for going to meet the king, he has to get a haircut and he has to shave. So the Chasam Sofer asks a question. It's a bit of a pupillistic question. So I'm not sure, I don't know that we have to take this as a pshat question, but it's an interesting question from a halachic perspective. He says, if it's Rosh Hashanah, what's Yosef doing getting a haircut? You're not allowed to get a haircut on Rosh Hashanah. Okay, so you could get a haircut if you weren't able to and you're free, right? The Gemara tells us on Chol HaMoed, if someone is freed from jail, then they can get a haircut, even though normally we don't get haircuts on Chol HaMoed. You have to get a haircut before Yontif, before the holiday begins. But Rosh Hashanah is not Chol HaMoed. Rosh Hashanah is full on Yontif. So what's Yosef doing going to get a haircut? And so
That's
to answer,
a problem that he's getting a haircut from a non-Jew.
yeah, so that might be meaning if we're taking this, we
Yeah.
could maybe say that. But the answer the Chasam Sofer says is based on the Rashi, right back on the previous page. Rashi says Vayigaleach, that Yosef got a haircut, mipnei kvod hamalchut, in order to show honor and respect to the king. It wasn't just right that he's free out of jail and now he needs a haircut, but it's specifically because he has an audience with the king. Again, I don't know if there's a technical halachic allowance if one of us gets summoned by the president or the king of Sweden or wherever to go on Shabbos or Yontif, that we'd be able to get a haircut beforehand. But this idea of Kvod Malchus, I didn't bring the other sources, but again, we saw this, I forget if it was last year or 2 years ago. Similar thing with at the end of Sefer Breshit, when Yaakov is on his deathbed and Yosef goes to visit him for the last time, it says that as Yosef comes to see Yaakov, Vayechazek Yaakov, right, that Yaakov was lying down in bed, he was weak, he was sick. When Yosef comes, he strengthens himself and he sits up in bed. So the Medrash says that the reason Yaakov did that is he says, even though I'm the father, and Yosef has to show kavod to me as his father, nonetheless, I'm going to show kavod to Yosef because he has a position of malchus. He has a position of authority, of government, of rulership. So I'm going to show him kavod. So Rabbi Daniel Feldman, who's a Rosh Yeshiva at Yeshiva University, quotes sort of Simcha Zisselbroid, the Rosh Yeshiva of Hebron Yeshiva, posits a number of theories explaining its importance. Among the 5 points he makes is what he considers a fundamental principle of the human personality. It is crucial for one's spiritual development that he possess the ability to appreciate great things. One who is jaded and cynical, who views all things with disinterest, is unable to attain any kind of meaningful spiritual maturity. Thus, it is critical to hone one's awareness of the extraordinary, and the attitude one brings towards royalty is certainly reflective of this vital attribute. What has any of this to do with Yosef, and why am I talking about it? I'm talking about it because I think this is one of the crucial messages of Hanukkah. That's one of, right, we said at the beginning of the year that we always read the Yosef stories in conjunction with Hanukkah. There's always an overlap. I think one of the issues in play at Hanukkah is the ability to appreciate a nes nistar, the ability to appreciate a hidden miracle. So there's all sorts of discussion about, right, is the main miracle of Hanukkah the miracle of the menorah, or is it the main miracle, the miracle of the military victory? And so one very common explanation is that really the people were of the mindset that the military victory was far greater, far more significant. Because if you think of, that's where their heads was. And so the Chazal, the rabbis played up the element of the Nes Pach Hashemin, the miracle of the flask of oil, in order to ensure that there would be bringing of God into it. If all you're celebrating, your main focus is a military victory, so then it becomes very easy to say it's because we had a good army and we had a better strategy and we were better equipped to fight in this terrain or whatever the case may be. And it can be very easily something which people take credit for themselves. So the rabbis were very deliberate in emphasizing the oil elements, the miracle of the oil, in order to make sure that there is an appreciation for God's role in both miracles. Once you're attuned to the miracle of the oil, then you're more likely to see God's hand in the military victory as well. But one of the right part of that is that we need to have an ability to perceive God's intervention and God's miraculous intervention in this world when there is no more prophecy, when there is no more direct communication. We have to have that sense of wonder. I think that's the connection that I'm seeing here. I'll pause. Any questions or thoughts up until this point?
I've got a thought going back a little bit,
Yeah, please.
if I may.
Yeah.
Just to confirm what you were saying, what Tanya White was saying with Joseph learning to see, that at the beginning of Vayeshev, it's the brothers who see. It's the brothers see that the father likes him more.
Right.
Right. And then when Joseph goes to see how they're doing, when Jacob sends them, the brothers see him from afar. So he's not doing the seeing. Somebody else is doing the seeing.
Beautiful. And that actually,
that
ties into a point I wanted to make. And I think here it is, source number 10. Vayeru oto merachok. I didn't bring the whole thing. So Beatrice points, right? The brothers see Yosef from afar, and they say, Hine ba'al hachalamot hazeh. They see the dreamer is coming. Okay, so one point is that Vayeru oto merachok. Obviously, there's a distance as he's approaching them, but also symbolically that they're distanced from Yosef. They're not on the same page. They don't agree. They don't see him. And so she wanted to make the point that because they're distance, that's why they call him Bala Chalomot. They don't call him Yosef, they objectify him. And so there's this right, it goes both ways. That we have this distance, and the brothers are the ones who see Joseph from afar, and they objectify him. And so there's distance all over the place. And so beautiful. That's a nice transition. Thank you, Beatrice. Okay. Back, I don't know that we need to see the psukim again, but another fascinating element with Yosef is we know that Yosef has his dreams, right? We know that that's, and his whole life, his whole career becomes a way for him to fulfill those dreams. He has a dream at the beginning of the brothers bowing down, the brothers, the father, the everyone else in the family bowing down to him. And then it seems impossible that from that point and everywhere that he goes in between, that this dream would come to fruition. But it does come to fruition, and ultimately everyone does bow down to him. And the reason it comes to fruition and the way that they bow down to him is because he makes it happen, right? Um, when he becomes the viceroy of Egypt and he recognizes the brothers and they don't recognize him, that would have been another good verse to bring to the point Beatrice just made. But when he recognizes them, he becomes the chess master and he can see 20 moves ahead what has to happen in order to make that dream that I had when I was a nar, when I was a youth. What do I have to do to make it come true? Add to that, um, when Yosef is in Potiphar's house, um, yeah, so source number 11. When he is in Potiphar's house, by Yosef hored Mitzrayma, by Yikneehu Potiphar Sris Paro Sar Tabachim Ish Mitzri Miyad Yishmaelim Asher Avidu Mishama. He's brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, the assistant to Paro, a courtier of Paro, buys him from the Ishmaelites who brought Yosef down. Vayhi Hashem et Yosef, Vayhi Ish Matzliach, Vayhi Beveit Adonav HaMitzri. God was with Yosef, and he was successful, and he was in his master's home, the Egyptian. Vayar Adonav ki Hashem ito, v'chol asher hu oseh Hashem matzliach biyado. His master saw that God was with him, and everything that he did brought success. It's apparent to everyone that God is with Yosef. The Rashi spells it out, ki Hashem ito. What does it mean that God is with him? Shem Shemayim Shagor B'piv. God's name was constantly in Yosef's mouth, right? Yosef was a Baruch Hashem Jew. How are you doing? Baruch Hashem. Thank God, right? God willing, I'll see you in 2 hours, right? He was always talking about God, and so that's how they knew that God was with him. When Yosef, at the beginning of next week's parsha, comes to Paro, Vayishlach Paro vayikra et Yosef vayartziu min habor vayigalach vayichalef tzin latav vayavo Paro. So Paro calls him. They take him from the pit, from the jail. He gets his hair cut on Rosh Hashanah, and he changes his clothing. He comes to Paro. Vayomer Paro Yosef chalom chalamti upoter ein oto ani shamati alecha lemor tishma chalom liftor oto. Paro tells him, I've had a dream. No one is able to interpret it. I've heard about you that you can interpret dreams. Vayan Yosef et Paro lemor bil adai Elokim yaneh et shlom Paro. Yosef says, it has nothing to do with me. God will see to Paro's welfare. Yosef talks about God all the time. Now here's the interesting thing. Something that I didn't realize is, again, Tanya White makes the point, God never speaks to Yosef. Think about the Yosef story. It's like it's something we assume, of course, God speaks to Yosef. God communicates with Yosef through the dreams. God gives Yosef the ability to answer other people, interpret other people's dreams. But unlike Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, where we have many times, Vayomer Hashem el Avraham, Vayomer Hashem el Yitzchak, right? God says to Abraham, God says to Jacob, God says to Moshe. God never says anything to Yosef. There's never communication between Hashem and Yosef. Which, it's a mind-blowing observation when we think about it, that that Hashem never speaks with him. And then, so
Does
so then
Joseph
she continues.
Does Joseph only use Elohim?
I don't want to answer that. I can't say for certain.
Okay,
Just
curious. I can look it up.
Wait. Elokim Yaneh Shalom Paro. It's certainly predominantly Elohim. I don't know if it's, I don't want to say for certain. Okay, so God never speaks directly to Yosef. Yosef has dreams, or Yosef interprets dreams, but God does not speak directly to Yosef. For me, this is a major piece of the hero puzzle. Sometimes we think of a hero when we think of someone who has a very clear notion of what their mission is. Yosef does not have clarity at any point in his life. he is able to put the pieces of the puzzle together. And there's another instance where we see this. I should have brought this before this money quote from Dr. White, but the other place where we see this is back in the attempted seduction by Eshet Potiphar, one of the most powerful Rashis, I think, in all of Chumash. In verse 11, Yud Aleph, Vayihi kahayom hazeh, vayavo habayita lasot melachto, ve'ein ish me'anshei habayit sham babayit. It was on that day, we already said that day, right? There was some sort of national holiday, some sort of celebration. No one else was home. It was a significant day in the Egyptian calendar. So Yosef goes lasot melachto, to do his work. Rashi tells us that really lasot melachto means he was about to succumb to the seduction. He was about to give in. Amra, okay. So in Rashi's telling, Amra, Ein li yom hagun lehizakek Yosef kayom hazeh. So Eshet Potiphar's wife says, this is, the stars are aligned. This is the day that I'm going to finally succeed in seducing Yosef. Amra lahem cholani ve'eni yachola leilech. So she says, I'm sick. I can't go to the celebration, to shul, to the church, wherever they were going to celebrate. La'asot melachto. What does it mean that Yosef went to the house la'asot melachto, to do his work? Rav Shmuel chad amar melachto mamish. So there's a debate between Rav and Shmuel. One of them says literally he's going to do his household chores, right? He's not part of the Egyptian religion. He's not going to worship their gods. He's going to go take care of what has to be taken care of in the home. Chad amar la'asot tzvachav ima. One says that he went, he had full intention of going to sin with Eshet Potiphar, with Potiphar's wife. He's gonna give in. He can't resist anymore. Ella shenir'et lo demut diuknoko shel aviv. And at the moment he was about to give in to her, right? Literally, as we see, his clothing is off. This is it. There's no turning back, it would seem. At that very moment, an image of his father pops into his head. As we see in Tractate Sota, right? So he sees the image of his father and he says, how can I do this? I'm Yosef, I come from such greatness. I can't give in. And that's when he runs away. That's when he goes outside. So we could understand this as that's the kindness that God does for Yosef, that God gives Yosef this image of guilt, this image to prevent him from sin. We could also read it as Yosef, consciously or unconsciously, subconsciously, conjures up that image on his own. He knows that the right thing to do is to resist. He knows that's what he wants to do. He wants to do the right thing. He doesn't want to give in to the temptation, but he's having a moment of weakness. And so when all else has failed, he's able to bring about this image, this memory of his father, and that is able to get him to run away, to not engage in the sin. So again, it's Yosef directing his own fate, his own destiny, that he's able to somehow conjure up that image at what seems to be the moment of his greatest weakness, and to not commit the sin that seemed to be inevitable at the time. As a side note, I guess just not fundamental to this, but a really interesting observation from Rabbi Soloveitchik, talking about Yosef's ability to conjure up the image of his father at this moment of great temptation. The Rav says that this is a manifestation of we'll read the whole thing. Rashi suggests that just as Yosef was about to succumb to Potiphar's wife, he saw his father's image and stopped himself. Young Joseph, as beautiful as the sun, violently ripped from his father's warm embrace, alone in Egypt in an environment of impurity and misfortune, was about to give in. Suddenly Joseph, who had not seen his father in years, conjured Jacob's strict yet loving gestalt. The true gauge of the relationship between son and father is not in the mitzvah of kibud av va'em, right? Honoring one's parents. Honoring one's parents means when your parents are there, right? Bring them food, serve your serve your parents first, speak kindly to them. But the mitzvah of kibud av va'em, according to this, is not so easily done if you're not in contact with your parents. Maybe you have to speak nicely of them. Maybe, right, if you hear someone saying something bad about your parents, you have to speak up. But you can't really do any of the kiyum, any of the fulfillments of kibud av va'em if you're not in contact, right? So we have it. Even if we're distant from our parents, we have phones and Zooms and Skypes and emails and text messages and WhatsApp. So we still have that ability. But Yosef didn't have that ability. So the Rav says the true gauge of the relationship is not kibud av va'em, right? When your parents are right there, obviously you're going to show respect to them. But ish imo ve'aviv tirau, right? A person should show fear or awe or reverence towards their parents. The mitzvah of mora. Mora means respect, recognizing the parent's authority. As the memory of a parent's physical appearance blurs, the greater the gap in time, the stronger the mora bond. While kibud wanes, mora only grows with distance. And so the true test, the Rav says, is when you are distant, when you're not in direct contact with your parents, do you still live up to their values? Do you still have that sense of shame of what would my parents say, what would my mother say, what would my father say if they saw me doing this terrible thing, even though they're not going to see me? So that I thought that was a nice, again, not fundamental to what we're saying, but I thought it was a nice footnote to this idea that's brought in Rashi. Yeah,
May I say something?
yeah,
I was just thinking when you were talking about Yosef being a God mentioning person,
yeah,
that maybe that was an effect of his relationship with his father, that his father had imbued that kind of outlook.
very possible, very possible, very likely, I'd say.
So maybe that's connected in some way.
Yeah, I think maybe it is. So that right, it never really left him, and so because it never left him, he was able to channel it at the moment when he most needed it. So I'll add one more piece to this, and again, sort of what we said already, but back to the Hanukkah connection, is that I think this is another key piece, a key message of Hanukkah. We already said that Hanukkah is a time where we have to show an appreciation and an awareness and a sensitivity to the miracles around us. But part of Hanukkah is also it's a holiday that's entirely post-biblical. God in the story of Hanukkah doesn't communicate directly with us. And so just as Yosef is someone to whom God never communicates directly, to whom, right, God never speaks to him, he only is able to understand, get a vision of what it is that God wants of him ultimately in life, what his mission is, and then he has to figure out how to go about achieving that mission. So we have lots of help in figuring out what our mission is and what we're supposed to do in life. But that's part of what Hanukkah is also, is to be able in a world in which God does not communicate directly with us and doesn't hold our hands and say, do X, do Y, do A, B, C, and D, right? When we don't have that direct chain of communication, to still be able to figure out what is the appropriate way to commemorate the great things that happen to us in life. What is the appropriate way to be able to show our recognition and awareness of Hashem in a much cloudier world, and that's part of the message of Hanukkah as well. I think that's it's not a coincidence that we always read these stories of Yosef in conjunction with Hanukkah. Again, we spoke about this at length. I think at least for 2 years previous in our Parsha Shir. I'm sure at least one of them, if not both of them, are on the YouTube. Happy to share additional source sheets if anyone wants to see it. But But that's what we got for tonight. Are there any final thoughts or questions?
Um, I
Yeah,
have one
please.
to offer.
Yeah.
I noticed that you began with references to Yosef's beauty, or at least he's trying to enhance his beauty.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a theme that could be worked through all of these pasukim with that whole matter. It's as if his own identity required in his teenage years, and it happened again in the house of Potiphar, actually, according to Rashi, that he did it again, that he was basing his need to recognize his physical beauty when we know already from earlier in the Torah that because of Rachel, he inherited great. He was very handsome to begin with. What was he doing with all of this? So it's a way of telling a tale, and there are all these different stages. There are about five different stages just on this theme. So um, the point being that we are here to recognize God's beauty, in our lives,
Wow.
and he finally does come to that through his father's face. That this is the source of a change for him, because he is struck again by the awe for his father, and then this opens him up. And then
Hmm.
later on in Egypt, well, he gets a haircut because it's part of his job.
Right.
He puts, and the Rebbe has an extensive note on his just kind of putting on the clothes that he had to wear because that was his job, that was his work, his sense of mission, and he didn't insist in having the best horse or the whatever. We get to our Purim tale already through this, but he's anyway, I just wanted to draw a little attention to that. His
Yeah.
father has the Sphira of Tiferet, which means that he does have a sense, his father, of balance and of beauty as a result of it. The balance of Gavura and Chesed, of strength and discipline, and also kindness, the two of them together. And Yosef sees so much in his father's face. It's as if he had been needing to buttress his own identity by doing kind of some ridiculous things, probably to the people around him. He didn't need to do anything else, but somehow he felt he needed to. And then later on, once he had a sense of what he really should be doing, these things were able to be put into their proper place and harmony in his life.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
I want to share just like how traumatizing that Rashi was for me when I was in high school.
Yeah.
Um, and this idea that teenagers are definitely teenage boys, I could speak to at least. I'm sure it's true of females as well, into their looks. And
Mhm.
I take actually exception to Rashi. I think that Yosef's ultimate success stems from the fact that he cared. He knew what he looked like. He was he was like not the shepherd like his brothers were, but somebody who was aware of the gifts that he had.
Hmm.
Like maybe like the kid that sings songs in his room in front of the mirror and goes on to become a multi-platinum recording artist.
Broadway
Yeah,
star with a
but like
Technicolor Dreamcoat, right?
right? Vayimsad
Yeah.
Yosef chen be'einav, right?
Yeah.
Chen be'einav doesn't just mean I like the guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
It means like he's palatable. Like Yosef is the kind of person, especially for an Ivri, right? Is the kind of person that you could stomach and you could look at, and his brothers don't recognize him at the end. And so the idea that like he's spending all of this time primping himself in front of the mirror and worried about his looks, and that's a negative thing, I think is a very how would I put this? I think it's a very flippant dismissal if we think about Jewish leaders in our community who
Interesting.
make
Yeah.
differences to the outside world. They're not walking around in the same clothing as the Jewish leaders inside of our community. They do have to dress the part. And I want to give Yosef credit for that. Like, for somebody who's going to save the Jewish people, um, looks matter, you know?
Yeah. Okay, I hear that.
That's just my piece.
Okay.
And so
Yasher
that's
koach.
why I have all my hair now. 'Cause
Right.
in yeshiva they look so much different.
Okay, so I think that's a great way to end the night, just noting the complexity of Yosef and all these stories. And so we'll have what to discuss next year also, hopefully.
Yes.
All right, so as I said at the beginning, the next 2 weeks are school vacation. We're going to be out of town, so I'm gonna pause the Parsha Shir for the next 2 weeks, and we'll resume after that in the new year. And hope everyone, we'll still be in Shul for Shabbos. Looking forward to seeing everyone there. And if we don't see you, have a wonderful Hanukkah, which starts next week. And that's it. Have a good rest of the week.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Rabbi.
All right.
Have a great
Have a good night.
vacation, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Hope it goes well.
Amen. Thanks.